This marks the 5th part of this manhwa. If you haven't viewed the previous parts, you can access it by clicking the I button located above, or the link is provided in description. Let's aim for 400 likes on today's video. To show your support, consider subscribing to the channel. Let's begin our recap video for today's manhwa. When Eren sliced through the iceberg and unintentionally released the vast power within him, it became clear that he had yet to fully comprehend and control the force. The dragon's blessing, an immense and overwhelming energy residing in his body, required extensive training and discipline. Eren faced numerous battles with monsters and participated in a territorial war. During these conflicts, he deliberately limited himself, using only the fraction of power he could manage to keep under control. His focus was on suppressing the dragon's blessing, rather than unleashing its full potential, due to the risk of losing control. However, after his encounter with Philip, Eren had an important realization. Merely expanding his territory and power base would not be sufficient to challenge the Emperor. He needed to refine his abilities and cultivate an entirely new kind of strength, one that went beyond raw power. This prompted him to intensify his mental training, seeking a more balanced approach to harnessing his power. In the present moment, Eren is beginning to see progress from his training, even if it's only a small improvement. Eren executed the piercing wind technique to eliminate fleeing enemies within his range, feeling satisfied with the strength and precision of his attack. Meanwhile, the Holy Knights, led by Archbishop Abel, continued their retreat, though Abel remained furious with Eren, cursing him as they withdrew. Suddenly, a fire attack struck some of the retreating knights, prompting Archbishop Abel to question if it was another mine explosion. However, Lucas, the commander of the Holy Knights, pointed to the sky, revealing that the fireballs were coming from above. In response, Archbishop Abel summoned his immense power to manifest several giant fists to block the incoming fireballs, proudly smiling and as he believed he had successfully neutralized the threat. However, after the fireball spell, Cheryl used another magic spell, unleashed an even more powerful attack known as Flame Shower, directing it toward the retreating knights. Lucas was visibly shocked by the intensity of the attack, but Archbishop Abel, confident in his abilities, he assured him he could handle the magic and urged him to continue retreating without worry. As Archbishop Abel was preparing to handle the magical onslaught, he was taken by surprise when Rommel and his cavalry suddenly arrived on the scene. Without hesitation, Rommel charged at Abel with his sword, aiming to strike him down. However, to Rommel's confusion, his sword was deflected, as if it had struck an invisible barrier. Upon closer inspection, Rommel realized what had blocked his attack: a large number of spectral hands lined up in formation, preventing him and his cavalry knights from advancing or attacking. Archbishop Abel, the protective spell had been cast by Lucas, the commander of the Holy Knights. Lucas, aware of the danger they were in, called out to the Holy Knights and Archbishop Abel, urging them to retreat, and he assured them of divine protection and advised them to escape quickly. Taking Lucas's advice to heart, Archbishop Abel and the Holy Knights immediately began their retreat, using the opportunity provided by the Lucas to make their escape without further confrontation. Seeing the Holy Knights and Archbishop Abel retreating, Rommel ordered his knights then to pursue those leaving the canyon. However, Eren, who had just arrived, intervened and warned Rommel that the enemy is probably gathered outside the canyon. Their chase will end here. Eren reflected on the situation, realizing that the divine protection of Purus, the god of protection, was likely at play. He noted how a single holy knight, Lucas, had managed to halt their advance with the divine barrier, which rendered Cheryl's magic ineffective and deflected their attacks. Recognizing the formidable nature of the divine barrier, Eren decided to act. He drew on his sword aura and directed it towards Lucas's barrier, aiming to test and potentially breach the powerful defense. As the dust settled, it became evident that Lucas's divine barrier remained intact despite Eren's earlier attempt with his sword aura. Lucas declared that the impenetrable wall demonstrates the power of God Press. Aaron, frustrated by the failure of his sword aura, considered alternative approaches. He questioned whether this could penetrate the wall if the sword aura couldn't. He rushed toward the barrier, applying mental strength to his sword attack. However, he quickly realized that even with added mental force, the attack of his sword was deflected by the barrier. Determined to find a solution, Aaron discarded his sword and removed the armor from his arm. Lucas asked Aaron what he was doing, confused by his actions. Aaron then swung his bare fists at the divine barrier. The sheer force of his punch, combined with his determination, managed to break through the barrier and push Lucas backward. Aaron, having successfully breached the divine barrier with his bare fists, smiled and remarked on the wall's impenetrability. He then ordered his knights to capture Lucas. As the knights advanced to apprehend Lucas, his expression grew dark with despair. Realizing the dire situation, he wondered if this was the end. In a desperate move, he pulled a dagger from his pocket and attempted to take his own life, while pledged his loyalty to God Perez. However, Aaron swiftly intervened, rushing to Lucas and striking the dagger from his hand, causing it to fall. He then seized Lucas by the neck and he warned him that this was just the beginning. The Blanche fortress is one of the 2 castles in the holy nation that borders the empire. In peacetime, it functions as a bridge for missionary activities in the eastern regions. However, during wartime, it becomes a strategic outpost and a critical route for advancing into the east. The Pope plans to expel Aaron's besieging forces from the outpost by deploying a substantial force of 50,000 auxiliary troops to undertake the purification of the Brahn territory. This battle comes after the loss of Lucas, the commander of the Holy Knights, and Archbishop Abel, who has become isolated within the Blanche fortress and is now solely focused on his own safety. The impending arrival of reinforcements from the Pope is seen as a divine intervention by Archbishop Abel. Standing before a statue of Press, Abel vowed to avenge both himself and Lucas. He was filled with determination and smiled as he read the letter from God Perez commanding him to seek revenge. The auxiliary troops from the Holy Nation are expected to arrive in 5 days. Upon learning that the Holy Nation's auxiliary troops were on the move, Aaron took immediate action to capture the Blanche fortress as swiftly as possible. Despite deploying every available strategy, including various types of arrows and siege weapons, none proved effective against the Perez Church's divine barrier. Aaron observed that the barrier remained unbroken, prompting him to conclude that conventional methods were insufficient. He noted that even sword auras failed to penetrate the defense. In the midst of his frustration, Kanis remarked on the situation, acknowledging the formidable power of Press's divine authority, specifically referring to it as Press's hand. Aaron noted the ineffectiveness of their current siege methods, stating that the arrows were being deflected and the boulders, the only projectiles that could penetrate, were being intercepted. He then inquired about the divine magic bomb, asking if Cecilia had provided any updates. Kanis responded that Cecilia had reported they lacked the necessary manufacturing methods to create the magic bomb. Even if they could produce it, completing the bomb before the enemy reinforcements arrived would be impossible. Aaron then asked about Cheryl's status. Kanis explained that Cheryl was currently resting to recover the mana she had expended during the previous battle and in making magic landmines. He estimated that she would need 3 to 4 days to fully recuperate. Aaron expressed concern about their dire situation, realizing they couldn't rely on divine magic bombs or Cheryl's magic in the immediate future. He wondered if there was any way to bypass the divine barrier. Kanis stating that, aside from waiting for Cheryl to recover, they had no other options. He hoped Cheryl's powerful magic would eventually be able to destroy Perez's hands. With the Holy Nation's auxiliary troops arriving in 4 days, Aaron, left with no alternative but to depend on Cheryl, continued leading repeated but ineffective attacks, resulting in a fruitless war of attrition. That night, Kanis commented on the strength of Press's hands, Noting that it was more formidable than anticipated, he expressed doubt about relying solely on Cheryl's recovery. Eren, puzzled, asked Kanis to elaborate. Kanis, noting that even if she miraculously recovered, there was no guarantee her magic would be effective against Perce's hands. He proposed an alternative plan, predicting the enemy's reinforcements' marching route. Kanis pointed to two locations on the map and explained that the enemy would either mobilize all their troops to eliminate Eren's forces or bypass Blanche Fortress to advance directly into Brahn territory. The challenge, however, was the distribution of food and the large number of enemy troops. If they took a detour to avoid confronting the enemy directly, their own rear would become vulnerable to threats. Consequently, Kanis believed the enemy would use their full strength to force Eren's forces out. Eren asked Kanis for the alternative plan if they couldn't capture the Blanche fortress in time. Kanis suggested a rapid retreat into the Supia forest and preparing for a siege on Brahn Castle. Eren was taken aback by the idea of a siege, realizing the gravity of the situation. He thought that if the main castle was targeted, all his efforts would be in vain and the damages could be catastrophic. He worried that not only would overthrowing the emperor become impossible, but he might also fail to protect the citizens of the territory. Overwhelmed by the thought of failing to protect the people, Eren began to tremble, questioning how he would be any different from Duke Eren, whom he presumably despised for similar failures. This realization deeply troubled him. Eren, enraged and frustrated, slammed his hand on the table and reflected on his situation with despair. He chastised himself for letting a few victories inflate his confidence, feeling that he had acted recklessly and not with the prudence expected of someone in his position. He was distressed by the thought of his hasty decisions leading to potential disaster. Seeing Eren's turmoil, Kanis reassured him, saying that even if they were besieged, it didn't necessarily mean losing the war. He believed that with the Duke's and Cheryl's power, they could withstand the siege. Kanis acknowledged that while there would be damage and some loss of citizens, they could endure the situation and potentially negotiate an end to the war afterward. Eren, furious at the suggestion of sacrificing citizens, grabbed Kanis by the collar, and he questioned the idea of sacrificing their citizens. He shouted in anger, asserting that losing their citizens would render everything meaningless. Eren's intense outrage shocked Kanis, who thought that while some sacrifices are typical in war, Eren seemed more upset than expected. Rommel then intervened, advising Eren to channel his anger towards the holy nation rather than directing it at his own subordinates. He reminded Eren that there were still 3 days left to act. Eren immediately released Kanis and apologized respectfully, acknowledging that he was overly agitated and assuring Kanis that such behavior would not recur. Kanis accepted the apology, stating that as the Lord's strategist, it was his responsibility to provide the best possible plans. He committed to finding a way to capture Blanche Fortress and assured Eren that he would do his best to resolve the situation. During their discussion, Cheryl suddenly interrupted by exclaiming, 200,000 gold, surprising everyone and redirecting their attention to her. Cheryl, noticing her frustration, questioned why nothing seemed to be working in her absence. She asked if they had considered using blizzards or similar techniques. Eren responded that he hadn't tried that yet, but noted that sword auras had proven ineffective against the barrier. Cheryl, frustrated, challenged Eren's resolve, asking if their failure was due to the weakness of the methods or the lack of determination. She scolded him, saying that if he was committed to avoiding citizen casualties, he shouldn't have started the war. If he had decided to fight, he should have used all available means to succeed. Eren was taken aback by Cheryl's criticism, reflecting on whether he had truly done his best. As Cheryl began to walk away, Rommel inquired about the 200,000 gold she mentioned. Cheryl explained that it was the amount she would receive for destroying the divine barrier, indicating her readiness to tackle the challenge and her value in resolving the situation. Frustrated and reflecting on Cheryl's words, Eren acknowledged that they needed to use any means necessary to secure victory. His gaze fell on his sword, contemplating their current predicament. Meanwhile, Cheryl moved towards the Blanche fortress, considering the enormity of the task ahead. She recognized that she was using an unusual attribute of her magic that required significantly more mana than she currently had. Despite her uncertainty about whether she could achieve the destruction in her present condition, she believed this was the only way to destroy the fortress in one decisive strike. As Cheryl began casting her spell, and she summoned a water spirit, seeing the spirit, she thought to herself that the energy still felt insufficient. Feeling increasingly nervous, she realized she might need 1 or 2 more days of rest to fully recharge. However, she was reluctant to admit her limitations after having been so confident and boastful about her capabilities. Cheryl's contemplation was interrupted when Erin placed a hand on her shoulder and asked what she was thinking about. Cheryl, brushing off his concern, replied she wasn't thinking about anything and then instructed him to have his soldiers on standby. She emphasized that the real action would begin after she destroyed the fortress, reminding Erin about her 200,000 gold reward. Erin, smiling, agreed to the 200,000 gold and turned to Rommel, ordering him to get the soldiers on standby. As Cheryl approached the Blanche fortress, soldiers on the castle wall spotted her and immediately reported her presence to Archbishop Abel, saying that someone had arrived at the battlefront. Archbishop Abel, while praying, asked for a detailed report. The soldier reported an unidentified person about 30 meters away, who did not seem to be from the Holy Nation. Annoyed, Archbishop Abel instructed his subordinate to seek God Press's grace, and they all began to pray. They activated Press's authority, creating the divine barrier known as Press's hand in front of the castle. Meanwhile, Cheryl inserted her wand into the ground, uncertain if her spell would have sufficient power but resolved to proceed. She started casting a spell and unleashed a tidal wave attack aimed at the castle. Seeing the magic spell, the soldiers quickly reported the attack to Archbishop Abel. Despite the report, Abel remained confident, believing that no power could surpass God Press's authority. When Cheryl's tidal wave hit Press's hand, it only caused a minor tremor to the castle wall. Abel stood resolute, assured that they had successfully blocked the attack. However, Cheryl announced she wasn't finished yet, and proceeded to cast another spell. She summoned numerous mudworms and directed them to assault the castle, continuing her assault despite the previous failure. Upon seeing the huge mudworms, Archbishop Abel felt a pang of nervousness. The mudworms began to collide with Perce's hand, causing the castle wall to tremble significantly. Trying to regain his composure, Abel questioned if this was truly magic, but remained confident that it would be ineffective against Perce's authority. He prayed for God Perce to bring down his iron hammer, initially with no effect. However, after a more desperate plea, the spell activated. Abel smiled as the iron hammer spell struck the mudworms, destroying some and surprising Cheryl. Not resting on his laurels, Abel cast the iron hammer spell again to further obliterate the mudworms, leaving Cheryl shocked at the effectiveness of Perce's power. At that moment, Aaron arrived on the scene, bypassing Cheryl and launching his piercing wind attack towards the castle. Upon seeing Aaron's attack, Archbishop Abel recognized it as sword energy and deemed it dangerous. However, Aaron's control over his piercing wind attack was inadequate. The attack only grazed the tip of Perce's hand, cutting through the fingers and continuing upward. Relieved that it missed a direct hit, Abel thought they were fortunate. As Aaron launched a second piercing wind attack, it struck the center of Perce's hand but failed to cut through. Determined, Aaron resolved to try again. He lifted his sword and launched a third piercing wind attack, but once more, he poorly controlled it. The attack veered off course and moved towards the sky instead of hitting Perce's hand. Shocked and frustrated by his repeated failures, Aaron collapsed to the ground. Seeing Aaron from the castle wall, Archbishop Abel smiled condescendingly, thinking it audacious for a mere human to believe he could overcome God Perce's hands. From a distance, Kanis observed the conflict and reflected on the blessings he had provided to the humans. He realized that these blessings might not be sufficient to surpass divine power. Considering the gravity of the situation, he contemplated stepping into the forbidden domain to aid Eren. Kanis recalled that, long ago, when humans worshipped dragons, the gods were displeased with this shift in worship. The gods felt that dragons were excessively interfering in human lives and prohibited such practices. When their commands were ignored, they delivered divine punishment, an act that was later referred to as the forbidden domain among dragons. At dawn, while Archbishop Abel was sleeping in the castle, a bat controlled by Kanis watched over him. Kanis used his power to induce a nightmare for the sleeping Archbishop. In the nightmare, Abel saw Lucas severely injured. Shocked, Abel asked Lucas if he was okay. Lucas, raising his sword, pleaded for rescue and then swung his weapon at Abel, aiming to decapitate him. The nightmare abruptly ended, and Abel awoke, disoriented, and immediately checked his surroundings. Confused, he questioned why Lucas was asking for help when he was certain Lucas had died. Archbishop Abel began praying, asking God first to comfort Lucas's soul and grant him the power to save Lucas if the dream was real. From the perspective of his controlled bat, Kanis observed Abel's distress and thought that if they couldn't break through from the outside, he would need to undermine them from within. Kanis then felt a chilling sensation, suspecting it was a sign of divine retribution from the forbidden domain. He looked to the sky, resigning himself to the belief that he would soon face God's punishment. The next afternoon, 2 days before the arrival of reinforcements, Abel stood on the castle wall, contemplating the revelation that Lucas was still alive. Archbishop Abel was interrupted by a soldier reporting that the enemy seemed to be retreating. Abel questioned whether the retreat was real. At that moment, Eren approached the castle, which surprised Abel. Eren stopped and sent a pigeon carrying a letter through Perce's hand. The pigeon landed on Abel's hand, and Abel retrieved and read the letter. The letter promised that while they will retreat today, Eren will eventually destroy the cult entirely. To prove his words are true, he will execute a cultist in their grasp to demonstrate his resolve. Fuming with anger after reading the letter, Abel cursed Eren, referring to him as a cultist bastard. Archbishop Abel noticed 3 catapults in the distance and observed that Lucas and several knights were tied to the stones of the catapults. He realized that his nightmare had not been a dream. Meanwhile Lucas, bound and facing the catapults, shouted at Kanis and the soldiers, condemning them and claiming that God Perce would judge them. Kanis instructed a soldier to prepare and cut the rope of the catapult. However, Lucas yelled for them to stop. Abel, growing anxious, understood that this was the execution Eren had mentioned in the letter. As the soldier raised his axe to cut the rope, Lucas pleaded with Archbishop Abel to save him. Meanwhile, Kanis ordered the soldiers to fire the catapults. He cut the rope, and the stones, along with Lucas and the other holy knights tied to them, were launched towards the castle. Kanis, observing the scene with a smile, thought to himself that this kind of spectacle was only possible while in human form. He found the situation enjoyable and was determined to continue despite the impending divine punishment. As the catapults were fired, Eren, Cheryl, and Rommel prepared to launch their attack, ready to act when the opportunity. During early morning mission planning, Kanis instructed them to follow his directives precisely without raising objections due to the limited time available. He asked if everyone was ready, and they responded with serious attention, indicating their readiness to comply with his plans. After giving his initial instructions, Kanis began to explain the mission details them. At the same time, as the catapult stones were nearing the castle, Cheryl remembered Kanis's earlier order to summon fire spirits once the catapults were in use. Recognizing that the moment had arrived, she cast the spell to summon a fire spirit and directed it towards the ongoing stones. The fire spirit concealed itself behind the rock, remaining unnoticed by the enemy. As the stone carrying Lucas approached Perce's hand, Archbishop Abel panicked, fearing that a direct hit would fulfill his nightmare. He quickly ordered his subordinates to deactivate the divine barrier, Perse's hand, and to stop their prayers. With the divine barrier removed, the stone and the concealed fire spirit moved and hindered into the castle, reaching their targets without obstruction. Cheryl activated the fire spirit, causing it to expand its enormous hands, that first destroyed the stone it had been hiding behind. The spirit then began attacking the castle wall, leaving Archbishop Abel shocked by the unexpected assault. Meanwhile, Aaron remembered Kanis's instruction from their earlier meeting to charge into the castle without hesitation once the initial attack began. Acting on this, Aaron quickly discarded his heavy armor and sword and sped towards the castle on his horse. Archbishop Abel, observing the situation and realizing that the castle walls were in imminent danger of destruction, urgently instructed his subordinates to resume their prayers. Their goal was to invoke the hand of Pres, he believed to provide protection to the castle walls. Additionally, he sent a subordinate to check on Lucas's condition. At the same time, Cheryl took action by summoning the spirit of Inferno and directing it toward the castle wall. Archbishop Abel and his subordinates began their prayers, and the hand of Pres began to envelop the castle wall in protective energy. However, before the protection could be fully established, the Inferno spirit, summoned by Cheryl, attacked and destroyed the already damaged part of the wall. This caused concern among Abel's subordinates, who turned to him for guidance. Abel reassured them, saying that as long as the hand of Pres was active, the enemy would be unable to breach the castle walls. Archbishop Abel was taken aback when he saw Aaron entering the castle on horseback, surprised by how quickly Aaron had arrived. Aaron, pointing directly at Abel, proclaimed that he had come to personally claim Abel's head. In response, Abel laughed and dismissed Aaron's threat, noting that Aaron had only managed to damage the wall and lacked the means to challenge him effectively. Abel then commanded his soldiers to first reinforce the castle wall and then to deal with Aaron, whom he referred to as a crazed heretic disrespecting the name of Lord Pres. As the Holy Knights charged to attack Aaron, he noted their focus on protecting the castle wall. He moved toward the knight guarding the damaged wall. When the knight raised his shield to block Aaron's punch, the force of the strike sent him crashing into the wall, leaving him unconscious. Aaron then took the knight's shield and positioned himself in front of the destroyed section of the wall, declaring his intent to prevent anyone from approaching it. He turned to Rommel, asking for confirmation on the difficulty of breaching the wall, to which Rommel agreed. Following Rommel, other soldiers from Aaron's forces entered the castle through the gap in the wall. Archbishop Abel, witnessing this turn of events, was left in shock, while Aaron smiled triumphantly at the unfolding situation. This marks the conclusion of the 5th part of this manhwa. To show your support for the channel and help speed up the release of recaps for your favorite manhwa, please consider subscribing to the channel. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.